What's up guys, I'm Phoenix Master 1 and welcome back for some more Fire Emblem Heroes, and this is gonna be my comprehensive analysis and review for the new weapon refines of Julius, Soleil, Owain, Bride Tharja, and Laevatein. I'll be going over my opinion of these weapon refines and these units, and I'll also give a lot of builds that you can run for different game modes like PvE, Arena, and Aether raids. If you enjoy these in-depth analysis videos, which I always make, I would really appreciate if you could Eldritch smack down that like and subscribe button, just like Owain. And with that said, let us begin. In my opinion, the winner of this batch of weapon refines is clearly Julius. His weapon refine is extremely good, that makes him stand out and also makes him unique. Julius is of course susceptible to the dragon effective weapons for obvious reasons, and the base effect of this weapon refine only works against the foes who do not have dragon effective weapons. If they do not have dragon effectiveness, then he can inflict -6 attack and resistance debuff on them during the combat, and he also gets the Dragon Wall skill from this base effect. So Dragon Wall is extremely unique, that too for an infantry mage who cannot have access to it, and makes him really bulky because of his high resistance and also the debuffs that he can do with this weapon refine. Then with the refinery effect, he can basically have sabotage attack and resistance to debuff the opponent for visible -5 attack and resistance, which is really great for the synergy with Dragon Wall. And finally, if he's above 25% HP, then he can also inflict another -5 attack and resistance debuff on the foe during the combat. So this weapon refinery part, unlike his base effect, is active against any kind of foe. Overall, Julius's weapon refine makes him into a formidable mage tank who's really good in the combat but can also support his allies with the sabotage attack and resistance built into his weapon. It's really easy to get the max damage reduction from his Dragon Wall because of all of the resistance debuff that he can do from his weapon. And in general, units in this game are going to be having less resistance than they're going to be having defense or really any kind of other stat. So that just gives an edge to Julius for making his damage reduction trigger a lot easily. And even if you don't invest into his resistance that much, he can still get a good mileage out of this kind of weapon refine. Obviously, because he's an old unit, you would want to invest into him heavily with Dragon Flowers, merges, summoner support, and all of those things, because as a ranged tank, he really appreciates all of the stats that he can get. Julius is a pretty solid unit in Aether raid's offense because of his high resistance, his damage reduction, and the fact that magical threats are really common in Aether raid, so he just has a lot of fun facing those threats and just absolutely crushing them and not really taking too much damage. His damage output is also quite respectable, and you can easily use Null Counter Disrupt on him to even deal with many of the annoying Fire Sweep and Dazzling Staff users. He can also work in Arena because of the damage reduction, but his defense is lower than his resistance, so at times he can take a lot more damage from the physical hits, but still the attack debuffs can help him have a decent amount of physical bulk. Like I said, you ideally want to give Julius a lot of investment with Dragon Flowers and merges, but even on a budget he can definitely be a pretty decent unit because of his extremely good weapon refine. So we have received Halloween Sophia and she has got attack res form, so you could definitely run that if you don't want to run mirror stance or attack res bond or anything like that, because you can get extra stats from the form skill and it's pretty easy to use in the enemy phase as it is, which he's made for. And guard, his default slot B skill, can work out to just deny the special charges of the opponents. And for getting the follow-up attack in the enemy phase, you should definitely be running quicker post with this kind of build. His slot C is definitely flexible, you could run any kind of skill that you want to, you can run a support skill or even just stick with his default skill. If you want to invest a bit more into him, then you can go into Divine Codes 2 section and have Mirror Stance 3 on his slot A. Any kind of tank appreciates the guard effect, and Julius is no different with his attack debuffs and Dragon Wall bulk. Peleus also has attack res Oath, so you can basically have a bootleg attack res menace combined with this skill and his weapon refine, and Mystic Boost can give him the healing, as the refinery part does want him to stay healthy. And if you want to use him in both phases, especially to have more power in the player phase, then you can go with attack res Unity or attack res Solo. Unity effect does give you the ability to deal with debuffs, which he definitely appreciates because of his high resistance, and low attack resistance will stack up with his in-combat debuffs to make him even more bulky. Again, quick repose is pretty much needed if you're not running that in the slot B. And Giant Drive attack can just give him extra damage output, as he pretty much wants to stay near his allies, especially if you run a Unity skill. And because we cannot run Mystic Boost with this kind of build, you definitely want to go with Aether so that he can heal up some HP. At high investment and max investment, he can definitely be run with Close Foil to give him extra attack and extra defense. His defense might not look the highest at first, but keep in mind that he gets a ton of attack debuff with his weapon refine, and that effectively gives him extra defense, and along with close foil you can pretty much stack it up and still have a pretty respectable defense stat. Of course, summoner support does help with this kind of build with the extra bulk and the extra resistance, so it is definitely recommended. And you can also run Julius with a speedy build, and the idea is quite similar to that of Legendary Chrom. Legendary Chrom and Julius basically have the same kind of speed stat, and both of them have the speed super boon. And as we all know, Speedy Chrom is a pretty threatening opponent. Obviously, Julius is not going to be that kind of threatening unit with this build, but still, he can definitely be pretty good if you are trying to invest into his speed. Now, it really depends if you want to build up this kind of Julius or not. Many people really dislike these kinds of speedy builds on these, slow units in general, and they want to specialize with their attack and resistance. So that's pretty fair in my opinion, but the extra speed can help you basically deny doubles of many of the opponents, but keep in mind that Julius is many times not going to be able to double many of the opponents himself because the fast units that we have right now in the game are pretty insane. So this is more for avoiding the doubles himself so that he can have a better bulk, because not taking the second hit can always lead into better longevity, especially when you can run null follow-up to just deny any kind of auto follow-ups. So that can pretty much add to his bulk with the damage reduction and the shenanigans from his weapon refine. This kind of build is definitely meant for max investment purpose if you can invest fully with his Dragon Flowers, merges, and summoner support, so that can basically allow him to have a lot better speed to deny the doubles. You can also use him in Aether offense. Like I said, he's a pretty fantastic unit there as a tank, so you can run Mirror Stance 3 and have Null Counter Disrupt. This can allow him to deal with many kinds of annoying enemies, and you can also support him with a near safe tank that can take care of Note, Legendary Secret, and those kinds of melee threats, while he can take care of the ranged threats pretty well with his high bulk. As you can see, he's got insane resistance and bulk with Dagger and Air, so tanking magical threats is just a joke for him, and he can even deal with many of the blue magical threats like Reinhardt because of his high bulk. And it's also easier to speed stack in the light season because of Peony. There's also the fact that you can run Temari Dagger on Air to basically debuff the speed of the opponent, so you can still be a bit fast even if you're not investing with the plus speed IV to deny many of the doubles, and the extra resistance goes really well with his weapon refine. And on dark defense, people are not going to be using mythics that give you resistance, unlike the Anima season where everyone is going to be running Mirabilis pretty much. So light season is pretty comfy for Julius in my opinion, and that's pretty much where you're going to be facing a lot of really threatening magical threats. Julius already has such high magical bulk that if you want, you can also run Sturdy Stance in his slot A to give him a bit more defense, which is lower than his resistance. I basically went with Mirror Stance 3 because you can easily get this from Divine Code section. The next build is basically a speedy build with Swiss Stance 3. So again, I explained the idea with the Speedy Julius similar to Speedy Chrom, but again, in the light season, it's a lot easy to stack up the speed because of Peony and because of the fact that you can run Temari Dagger on Air. Even though people are going to be running Shriandra, he can still be pretty fast, and that can definitely add to his bulk as he'll get doubled a lot less. And Null Counter Disrupt is basically the bread and butter for Aetherates as it is. You can of course run Steady Posture, but Stance 3 and Joint Drive Speed can be obtained from Ronin at the same time. Again, try to pair this up with a near safe tank for getting the best results. I haven't really showcased an Aetherate's defense build here because I don't think that Julius does anything too unique for Aetherate's defense, because you pretty much have to run him in the Dark season, because in the Astra, in the Anima season, people are going to be using Naga and she does give the dragon effectiveness, so the mileage of his weapon can be lowered because of that. And in the Dark season with Note, ideally you want to use many oppressive cavaliers and not just infantry units like Julius. Still, if you want to use him, you could basically use him with a pre-charged iceberg with something like Time Pulse and having Mirror Impact to make him really bulky and also making him hit really hard. But again, there's a lot of competition to be had for the Dark season for the oppressive threats that he can run with Note. Julius can also be used in Arena with our Duel Infantry 4. There are two ways of running Julius, either to invest into his attack and resistance, or you could go with his speed stat. I think I like the Speedy Julius a bit more for Arena purpose because many times he can double a lot of these slow units. Of course, you have to go with the Lull skill for Arena purpose because people do run the visible buffs. You can also run Blue Flame as a special. We are already debuffing the opponent's attack so much that Ruptured Sky doesn't really give you too much damage output unless you're facing some kind of dragon or beast unit, so that's why Blue Flame can work out. I would definitely recommend running a unit who can run some kind of ruse skill because Julius can really benefit from the guard effect, but unfortunately on an arena build, he can only get the guard effect, so getting that from the ruse skill can be extremely helpful in his survival and longevity. Soleil has been a popular merge project ever since she was in the game, and her weapon refine is basically a preferred fire sweep sword. The best way to describe this weapon refine with 2 words is mixed feelings, because this is a simple yet effective player phase weapon refine, and she's pretty good at the job that she does with this weapon in the player phase. But sadly, this weapon refine does absolutely nothing for the people who have been using her as a mixed phase unit for years with distant counter and other stuff. And if you still want to use her like that, then you pretty much are much better off using Carrot Cudgel or Unbound Blade as her weapon, because this weapon does absolutely nothing for the enemy phase, and it's simply a player phase weapon refine. And the preferred fire sweep sword pretty much means that you cannot even counterattack in the enemy phase unless you run null counter disrupt on her, which is pretty convoluted in my opinion with this weapon refine. So this weapon refine gives her +5 attack and speed in the player phase and special acceleration on her own hits in the player phase as well. So this allows her to be a player phase unit, and she can run Gale Force as well, but she pretty much has to run Time Pulse if you want to have a 4-turn Gale Force, because she will not be taking any counter attack with the fire sweep weapon, and because this weapon refine doesn't give her Time Pulse or -1 special cooldown, she pretty much has to rely on that. I definitely feel like there's something missing from the base effect of this refine. They could have added another effect like the -1 special cooldown or maybe partial null follow up so that she can excel even better in the player phase. But nonetheless, this is the weapon refine that she has got, and many Soleil fans are simply not going to be liking this kind of refine because they have been using her in a different way and not just with the fire sweep sword. Because with fire sweep sword, she's a player phase unit and she's going to be competing with many red infantry sword units who are also really amazing in the player phase. Soleil herself can also be really fantastic in that specific niche, which I'll talk about in the build section. So if you want to use Soleil on a budget, then you can definitely go with Life and Death and have Blade Session Secret Seal. It's a fire sweep sword, so it doesn't matter if you reduce her bulk, and Blade Session is a player phase focus skill, so it gives you the maximum offensive throughput. You can run Moonbow, and this can be really helpful in Arena Assault, as you could trigger that on your second hit. We don't have too many options for the slot B on a budget, so we could run Dragback, and maybe that can be useful for dragging out units out of the defensive tiles safely with their fire sweep sword. If you want to invest heavily into her, which I would definitely recommend if you're trying to use Soleil, because she is again an old unit and likes to have all of the stats she can get, especially to her speed, then you can go with the Gale Force build with Attack Speed Ideal and Time Pulse. Attack Speed Ideal, in my opinion, is the best slot A skill for Soleil because she has got the fire sweep effect. She is not going to be losing HP in the player phase, so the effect is going to be active, and it's really easy to buff up the units as it is to get the maximum effect of this skill. Null Follow-Up allows her to bypass the follow-up negation units and charge up her special, so that is really important for a Gale Force build. And Time Pulse brings down Gale Force to a 4 cooldown so that she can trigger Gale Force in a single round of combat if she double attacks. If you do not have access to this ideal skill, then you can also go with some other options like Sparrow and also Life and Death. And in my opinion, Null Follow-Up is really amazing for her slot B because she does not like getting stopped by those follow-up negation units and she wants to charge up her specials, so that's why I prefer that. Soleil can be used as a really fantastic Aether Raids offense unit on a Gale Force team. She's not to be used as an initiator, but instead with Wings of Mercy, and this allows her to jump in and trigger her Gale Force with Time Pulse, reducing its special cooldown by 1 and making it a 4-turn special. You can also run Quick on Pulse if you want to on a budget, and you can even run Valyria or have Raphael who can reduce her special cooldown. So because of the fact that she can get the special acceleration from her weapon, she doesn't have to rely on Flashing Blade and Slot A, so that frees up your Secret Seal to be used on some other unit like Dagger for example, and she doesn't have to bother meeting the requirements for those skills. So that is a big advantage of having Soleil in your Gale Force team, and because she's got the fire sweep weapon, she can also initiate against some really threatening opponents to just weaken them. For example, with Wings of Mercy, you can just attack into a Fallen Edelgard and just disable her damage reduction, and then some other Gale Force unit can just finish her off. I think this is pretty much her best use in Aether Raids offense as a Gale Force unit. And then if you want to have a build for PvE for in-game content, then you can definitely run double Life and Death. Soleil has got a monstrously high attack stat, and the AoE specials do count in the visible attack stat, so that's why we have to run Life and Death. And the idea is to basically run Special Spiral, and because she can accelerate her special from her weapon, she doesn't have to run Flashing Blade or anything like that, and she can basically loop the Special Spiral skill to spam the AoE special And with 3 dancers, you can beat up basically any kind of in-game content because she's going to be doing so much damage with the AoE special. And the fire sweep effect basically protects you against the one weakness of these kinds of AoE spam builds, which is Vantage. So she can function pretty well with multiple dancers with this build. And finally, if you want to use her in arena, then you can run her with Duel Infantry 4. Like I explained before, she really likes having null follow-up, especially when she's running Gale Force. And even if she's not running Gale Force and you're running something like Ruptured Sky, having the null follow-up means that you can basically trigger the Ruptured Sky on your second hit. And that can be pretty crucial against something like Fallen Edelgard, because with Time Pulse, Ruptured Sky becomes a one-turn special, and that means even against units with guard effects like Fallen Edelgard, you can charge up Ruptured Sky because of the special acceleration in her weapon and trigger Ruptured Sky on the second hit. So that can be useful if you want to have her deal with Fallen Edelgard in the player phase. So there are not too many skills and builds that Soleil would like to run, because with this kind of weapon refine, her playstyle is pretty limited and narrowed down in my opinion. So you basically have to just work with some player phase skills and have null follow-up and time pulse, and you pretty much have a high investment Soleil at that point. Owain gets a unique and good weapon refine that just feels so Owain with his playstyle overall. So the primary effect of Missiletainn is going to be giving him the special charges on foes' hits, kinda like Ringcast Club, and he also gets the -1 special cooldown, so you want to use 2-turn specials like Blue Flame, Bonfire, stuff like that with this kind of primary effect. And then with this weapon refine, he gets +10 attack and speed during the combat if both of the conditions are met, and he can also get true damage on his special triggers based on the missing HP of Owain. Now I just want to clarify that the HP check happens when the special triggers, so you don't have to take the damage in that same combat to get that kind of true damage. For example, you could have taken like 20 damage on Owain from a combat before, and then in this current combat you take 10 damage. So in total he's missing 30 HP, and that's why you're still going to be getting the 30 true damage when his special triggers. So it's pretty similar to the Vengeance special if it makes any kind of sense, but here he gets the true damage. And this can scale up to 30 true damage, which is no joke, and that just goes really well with his ballsy playstyle. So he's trying to take the damage from opponents when he doesn't get any kind of bulk from his weapon, so in a sense it kind of helps him. He can also appreciate the chip damage from skills like Distant Pressure and Fury, and all of that can just add to his true damage. So 30 true damage at max is pretty insane for like one-shot potentials, especially when you combine it with the special triggers that he can do with the primary effect of this weapon refine. And he can also beat many of the blue threats because of this massive true damage. So again, it's very Owain. He doesn't care who you are, he will just go in yelling into the battle. And that's pretty much how this weapon refine functions. So there's pretty much a thin line with Owain which you have to follow, which is the fact that he wants to not die, of course, so that he can survive and kill the enemies, but he also wants to take the damage so that he can get a good amount of true damage on his special triggers. Facing opponents with guard is definitely going to be extremely annoying for Owain because he's not going to be able to trigger his specials, and that just shuts down a lot of his damage output. Owain is a sword infantry unit and the competition is pretty much endless at this point, but still he can be unique because of the massive true damage that he can get. And his playstyle is again ballsy. It's not the most consistent thing, but it can definitely be really fun with the true damage that he gets. So again, very Owain weapon refine, true to his character. Looking over his builds, on a budget you could definitely go with the Fury in slot A and still use his Wrath, which is his default skill, which can give him even more true damage, and that will of course stack up with the true damage that he can get from his weapon. Blue Flame is a decent special on a budget which he already has, and he can retaliate back with it, and he can just have something like attack defense form to give him a bit more defense because he mainly gets offenses from his weapon. So something like this can be used on a budget. But at higher investments, I feel like you could definitely go with Spurn and have a healing special like Soul. Now it might seem really counterproductive to have a damage reduction skill and also healing on a unit who literally wants to take the damage, but hear me out. Like I said before, there's a very thin line you have to follow while using Owain, which is the fact that you want to survive hordes of enemies at times, and you also want to get the true damage. So this pretty much helps you with that because we can utilize this high speed with the Spurn, and that also gives him true damage. Distant Pressure can give you the chip damage, which helps you with the true damage of Missiletainn, and it goes really well with the damage reduction skill that he has got. So with this kind of build, he can, self-sustain, but at the same time also get the true damage, because his bulk is still not the highest even with a damage reduction build, and still he can get a decent amount of true damage, heal up to stay healthy and take on more foes. So that is the basic idea with this kind of build, and he's definitely one of the better users of distant pressure, I feel like, because he actively wants the chip damage compared to many of the other units who really dislike it. And because of this being an after combat chip damage, even if he heals up to full HP, he can still damage himself with distant pressure, and that's pretty good. So you can definitely fodder off the distant ancestor of Owain and Brave Marth if you want to have a build like this. Alternatively, he can also be used with a build that he's not going to be seen much in, which is a player face build with an AoE special. So he gets a -1 special cooldown from his weapon, and this build doesn't really make use of the special acceleration that he gets from his weapon. Basically, the idea is to use the true damage, and with Fury you're constantly going to be chipping your own HP, so that can just add up the true damage to the AoE special, and that just does so much damage to the enemies. Now, a fair bit of warning, if you're going to be running an AoE special with Owain, then you're going to be missing out on +5 attack and speed that you can get from the base effect of Missiletainn with this refine, because it checks the enemy's HP at start of a combat. But I feel like it's totally worth it to get this kind of true damage on an AoE special. So it of course requires you to have the visible attack stats, that's why we're running Fury, which can do the chip damage and have life and death here. And every kind of attack point really helps with this kind of AoE build. And ultimately he wants to reach the threshold of HP where he can do max true damage and do a lot of damage with Blazing Wind. And basically he can be used with like 3 dancers to clear a lot of the in-game content. Definitely a bit of a PvE build, but I thought I would feature this because it's kind of unique because of the fact that he can get massive true damage, and that does get added into the AoE specials. So that's pretty unique and very strong. You can also use him in Arena with Blue Flame that he already comes with, and this is where he can definitely excel with this kind of 2-turn special, retaliating back with it. And Null Follow-Up is really helpful because he can just get past many of the follow-up negation units and often just finish them after your Blue Flame retaliation. You can also run a lull defense skill if you want to focus on your one-shots even more, but I feel like Null Follow-Up can definitely help you in many scenarios. Finally, if you want to use him in Aether raids, then he can be used in 2 ways, either as a solo tank or as a support to a far save unit. So with the first build for Aether raids, you can basically run distant counter, Null Follow-Up, and have Flame support him so that he can also get the damage reduction. Null Follow-Up will help you against the auto follow-up units like Saros, Duel Lift, and stuff like that, so it's really invaluable here. And the idea is to basically retaliate back with Lunas, which are going to be doing a lot of damage when coupled with the true damage that he gets from Missiletainn Weapon Refine. So plus attack IV is definitely pretty nice for a build that focuses on one-shots, and this kind of solo build can work in both seasons, but I kind of like it a bit more in the Astra season. And Mystic Boost is going to be helpful for a bit of self-sustain, even though Fatal Smoke can be really annoying. Definitely again a ballsy build with a ballsy playstyle, but if you want to go all out with Owain, then this kind of tank build can work. Now in the light season, if you want to use him, then he can be used as a support for a far save tank, because he can be a melee tank in front of the far save tank, and the far save tank can just, protect him and all of the other allies from the ranged opponents, which are usually going to be more than the melee threats. So if you want to use him in the light season, then you pretty much need attack speed unity, as he's going to be on the front line, taking attack speed menace from Note most of the time, and then he can have a damage reduction skill so that he can have a bit more bulk. Of course, Null Follow-Up can also work here, but damage reduction can make it easier to take on multiple melee threats here, as you're not going to be running Flame with this kind of build. And Mystic Boost again is going to be providing you with a bit of self-healing, but of course Fatal Smoke is kind of annoying with these kinds of self-sustained builds. Luna is going to be allowing you to have really good damage output. Plus Speed IV is going to be helpful against Node, especially the ARD Speed Defense Node, which are rising in popularity, especially because we got the free Ephemera with that skill. So against her, having the plus Speed IV is really helpful to just double attack. Bride Tharja, in my opinion, gets a pretty decent weapon refine, at least when compared to Bridal Sanaki, who also had a similar weapon. At least Bridal Tharja can provide some kind of additional support to her allies, along with getting, offensive stats. So with her new weapon refine, she can basically get +9 attack and +5 speed during the combat, if all of the conditions are met, and she also gets the 3 range rain effect to opponent speed and resistance for debuffing them for -6 in those 2 stats. So this kind of in-combat debuff is really helpful to support the allies, and she can also support herself. This is always going to be active for her, and she can effectively get plus 15 attack and plus 11 speed if she's within 3 spaces of an ally and she meets all of the conditions. So that's pretty nice for the offensive role, but at the end of the day, this kind of support role is what, just separates her from a lot of the red mages. So this kind of 3-range support for debuffs is really helpful, but unfortunately, because she's not a flying unit, she cannot run a range skill on top of this to double down on her debuff playstyle like other range support units can, like Ashnard, Bohinoka, and of course Halloween Noe. So when she's used as a support for a save ball, you can basically put her in front, and then a near save and far save armor units will protect her. And because when they move to overlap her with the save skill, she is going to be giving them the support of this in combat debuff. But the problem is that save armor units appreciate the attack debuff a lot more compared to resistance debuff. I guess if you have a near save dragon or far save Ileana or Henriette, they could appreciate the resistance debuff, but it's a weird combo for supporting a save ball in my opinion. They definitely like the attack debuff, which unfortunately Bride Tharja lacks. But the speed debuff can help these armors in some matchups, like they can be helped to avoid a double from a slow opponent. And if you're a fast armor like Winter Felix for example, or if you have a speed stacked Vector, then you can basically try and avoid Windsweep from many of the fast threats. But still, it's not the easiest thing to do because you need a lot of investment. So she does have that niche of providing the immunity to Windsweep to fast armor units, at least to someone like Winter Felix, who's a pretty common and popular merge project. There's also the fact that she can be a really good user of Infantry Hexblade because she's a mage and she can support her allies with that and also provide them with the resistance debuff on the opponent to 3 range. So not only she's going to be able to help them get the adaptive damage, but also lets them get even more damage output because of the in-combat debuff. So that's pretty much the niche of Bride Tharja, being a support mage. The extra offenses that she gets is super helpful, but again, the support capability is pretty much what kind of separates her from a lot of the offensive threats, which are even more offensive than her. So for her builds on a budget, you can definitely go with a build that can be used in Arena Assault. You can just run something like double drive attack and maybe have Axe Breaker for some of the axe threats in Arena Assault. The Slot Seal and Sacred Seal are pretty flexible. And then you can go with stuff like Susparo and Desperation, which is pretty standard on any kind of mage if you just want to go the offensive route. Attack speed push for and loud speed resistance is also an option. And like I mentioned, Infantry Hexblade is a pretty neat skill that Bride Tharja can definitely appreciate. And we did get a ephemera with Hubert. So if you do have him, then I guess you could fodder him off for this kind of build to support your ally and provide them with the resistance debuff and also provide them with the drive attack debuff. So it can definitely be pretty nice for swinging some of the matchups against high defense but low resistance threats for those allies. Now, if you want to use her at max investment or high investment, I feel like Attack Speed Unity is a really good skill for her because she generally wants to stay near her allies, so it does have good synergy. And then you can have Null Follow-Up or a Lull skill. It's kind of flexible, depends on what your team is going for. And again, a Farm skill is pretty synergetic with the Unity skill and her Weapon Refine. Now here comes the unique part of her, which is an Aether Raid's offense as a save support unit. So you can run Even Pulse Tye from the Divine Code section or with Kurth the Naga, who's recently on a banner. And that can allow you to neutralize threats like Pre-Charged Legendary Sigurd, Pre-Charged Legendary Lilina, and also Pre-Charged Otter if you do decide to use her in the Astra season. So that's the support that you can provide from her Slot B, and then you can just run support skills in Slot C and her Sacred Seal depending on what you need. So the debuff can be helpful, especially if you have Halloween Ileana who appreciates the resistance debuff, or a near safe dragon like Winter Fae or Halloween Myr, which you might have gotten from a Hall of Form. So that's pretty much where Bride Tharja can be used. But like I said, a lot of the flying units who have rain skills in their weapons can pretty much do this role but a bit better because they can provide the attack debuff, and that is super good because that is effectively giving extra defense and resistance to your save tank, which they really appreciate. But still, Tharja is an option. Finally, if you want to use her in Arena with our Duel Infantry 4, then you can certainly use her with a Ruse skill to provide more support to your allies with the visible debuffs, the guard effect, and Infantry Hexblade can be also helpful. For example, if you have a +10 Ninja Hana then she can have a better time against someone like Legendary Chrom or Legendary Dimitri, who mainly has more defense than they have the resistance. But if not, then you can always run the standard offensive mage build on her and it wouldn't really hurt, but again, the support is what makes her a bit more unique, so you could run this kind of build. Finally, we've got Laevatein and her weapon refined to her Blade Tome Sword, or Blade I guess, and she gets the following effect with this weapon refine. She gets +10 attack and defense during the combat if all of the conditions are met. She can give herself the +6 attack and defense visible buffs if she's within 2 spaces of an ally, and she can also give +6 attack and defense buff to her support partner within 2 spaces. So this is a decent weapon refine that pretty much boosts her role of hitting hard and tries to make her a bit more self-sufficient with the buffs that she can get. However, it definitely leaves something more to be desired out of this kind of weapon refine on a 5-star locked unit. So I have used this kind of playstyle with a Blade Tome extensively because Nino is one of my favorite characters and I've used her since, at the start of the game, and she's one of my most invested units on both of my counts. I've used her at the highest level in Vault of Heaven and in Arena, and as a user of a Blade Tome unit, I can easily tell you that they are in a pretty shaky situation right now, at least now in the landscape of FEH. The reason being is that there are lull skills, there's panic, and there's damage reduction. Now, first of all, I stopped using Nino in the light season because Bramimon has got lull attack resistance, and lull skills can neutralize buffs to 2 of your stats, but that's still like a significant drop in power. So you're going to be missing out on some 1-round KOs and you're going to be missing out on some one-shots. So that is really annoying, and many of these units just come with that at base, like Bramimon, Duel Lift for example, and so many more. So that gets really annoying because lull skills just, lower your attack power. Panic is of course everywhere, but now we do have Ashera who can definitely provide you with the anti-panic, so that kind of support definitely helps, but still you always have to watch out for panic. Even for the in-game content, like you can have these high HP panic ploy units across the map, these sudden panic units and units with panic smoke and stuff like that. So you have to watch out for, those kinds of threats even in the PvE. And finally, damage reduction just allows many units to be deceptively bulky to even live hits from these kinds of high attack blade weapon users. Now that's the story of my Nino, a unit who hits the resistance and is 2 range. So she can snipe the targets unlike Laevatein, and she hits the resistance of the foe, which is usually going to be lower than the defense which Laevatein targets. So I basically wanted to tell you from my experience of using Blade Tome strategy extensively for years that it looks really strong on paper, but in reality you're going to be running into some hurdles, and they usually do not have an answer for those kinds of hurdles. You can only go so far in terms of damage output until you just get shut down. So that is the main problem with Laevatein and her weapon refine, that while it tries to double down on what she already does, it doesn't really fix the issues which Blade Tome Sword like her has against lull skills and panic. She could have maybe gotten some kind of anti-panic effect, or provide her with some kind of unique effect which could have perhaps helped her in the combat other than just her high damage output, and it doesn't even provide her with any kind of extra speed. So you pretty much lose out on the gap of the damage reduction units who can mitigate her damage output. If she had more speed, then she can basically close the gap, but she unfortunately does not. So that is the main drawback of her weapon refine and why so many people who run Laevatein are disappointed. I can definitely see where they're coming from, having used, the Blade Tome strategy for many years. With that said, if you do not run into these said hurdles, which I mentioned before, she can still pack a punch with this kind of weapon, and the extra defense can make her a bit more tanky, which as you'll see will be helpful in a build. So for her budget build, you can basically use her in Arena Assault, and it's kind of annoying that the self buff is kind of redundant with the attack defense link skill that she has got. So I guess you could replace this with any kind of budget skill. Dull Close does make sense for Arena Assault where people are going to be buffed, so you could run that and basically run Glimmer, which is a really good special with her, and she can basically be self-sufficient and buff herself for 3 stats. So that is pretty good. And then you can have a classic distant counter Vantage strategy. This can still work fine in PvE in my opinion because I still use my distant counter Vantage Ares just for that. So it can work in the in-game content. However, if you want to use her in the competitive game modes, then you'll definitely have to run a build that is kind of unusual, but I feel like this works in the modern times compared to the distant counter Vantage build. Now keep in mind this build doesn't really do anything too unique that a near safe Arden, near safe Gustav, or Pirate Searcher cannot already do. So again, this is basically her trying to be a melee tank who is being supported by a far safe tank. And with this kind of build and her weapon refine, she gets a lot of defense. She is basically hitting over 70 defense, and this works out well in the Aster season because of course you want to use her with Ashera. I wouldn't really suggest you to use her in the light season because of lack of Ashera. You're a lot more susceptible to panic in general, and there's also Note who can give everyone the extra defense. So it's a bit annoying in the light season, but in the Aster season with Ashera, you can at least just limit one of her weaknesses to panic. If you really like Laevatein and if you have her at max investment or high investment, then this is a build that you can utilize in the modern times in Aether raids. And attack defense unity really helps you in the slotty because in the Aster season, you're going to be facing Mirabilis who can debuff your attack. And there's also Aether, which you'll have to face, who has got attack defense menace. So she's still a magnet for chill attack because of her high attack stat, even though she is covered against panic. So attack defense unity basically helps you against those debuffs, which anti-panic of Ashera cannot really protect you against. And her matchups against the common melee threats is actually not that bad in the Aster season. So with this kind of build, we're going to be facing many max invested units which are going to be really strong, and this is basically the worst case scenario. You're not going to be running into these many +10 units all the time. So Aether, even being a green unit, still does quite a bit of damage to her with Brutal Chelt, but he will always die even though he has got a lot of defense. Legendary Secret also dies after pretty much taking off half of her HP, and Fallen Edelgard is absolutely no problem for Laevatein even when Edelgard is at +10 merge. And this is because of Null Follow-Up. So Null Follow-Up is really helpful because you can basically retaliate back with Glimmer. That is the idea of Steady Breath here. So units like Fallen Edelgard and Brave Hector who have Guard Effect and also Follow-Up Negation in their kit can basically still die to Null Follow-Up and Steady Breath Glimmer. And that is the main idea of this build. Null Follow-Up really helps you here, and she even kills a +10 Brave Hector. Brave Erica is also not a problem. This is a max invested Saros with Sturdy Impact and Sturdy Blow, just focusing on her attack and defense. And even without the Divine Fang buff, Laevatein can still kill this kind of Saros who's really bulky with Dragon Wall and the immense defense that she gets. So obviously if you give her the Divine Fang buff, then she can kill Saros even more easily in her bonus seasons, and this is the worst case scenario with Saros and she can still survive, but still she's not going to be outright dying to Saros. So that is pretty good for a red unit who doesn't have the most amount of resistance. But if you just want to use her like the good old days, then again, Distant Counter Vantage is a strategy. You can run Heavy Blade Miracle because that can really help you in many of the matchups where she's not able to one-shot something, and that is going to be happening more than you think because Blade Tome at the end of the day is still going to be facing against a lot of really bulky units. So we have basically come in full circle. Many times, many of these teams are going to be really aggressively based. They will not have Hardy Bearing or units who can stop Vantage because Vantage as a strategy isn't really as strong as it once used to be many years back. So the lack of Hardy Bearing nowadays within the teams is going to be helpful to Laevatein to just sneak past many of the teams, just use her as a counter pick, and she can just sweep a lot of the teams with that. So it could still be utilized, but it is a lot harder because she's not a ranged unit, so she cannot really snipe threats in the back line, but still her sheer power is going to be with this kind of build, and we can fully buff her and have her supported with Ashera to help her be immune to panic. The arena build is kind of similar to my melee tank build, and here you again want to use Steady Breath with a 2-turn special like Ruptured Sky, just increasing her damage output and one-shot potential with this kind of Blade Tome sword. And Null Follow-Up again helps you against those kinds of follow-up negation and guard units like Fallen Edelgard, who she can still kill because Ruptured Sky does bonus damage to beast units. So this is pretty much the build that you can use in arena to get a lot of one-shots and kill a lot of melee threats. Overall, the weapon refinery patch was decent. I definitely feel like Julius easily won this refine. It's kind of crazy that a free-to-play unit had the best weapon refine out of this patch, even when some of these units were 5-star logged, and also one of them was seasonal logged. And that just goes to show you that a weapon refinery can make any kind of unit relevant over the night if it's really stacked like Julius's weapon refine is. So I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot more Julius. And I hope you all enjoyed this video. Make sure to share this video with your friends who are thinking of building up any of these units. I definitely went in depth and provided a lot of builds and my explanations, so that could help. And if you enjoyed, then make sure to leave a like and a comment. Helps me tremendously. And if you really enjoyed, then you can support my content directly by using super thanks down below or by becoming a YouTube member. I want to thank all of my YouTube members, and for watching more Fate analysis videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because YouTube sub boxes are about as functional as Soleil's enemy phase with her preferred fire sweep sword. So with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.